The past has always interested me, both the past of my own family and the past of our Unitarian Universalist movement, and it turns out there's a connection between the two. To help in my research, I've built a history hut outside my house, and it's packed with the books that I use to do my research, and in that hut there's a picture of this man. This is Frederick Gale. Frederick Gale is my mother's father. My grandmother passed on to me the letters from this noble man to his sweetheart back in Vermont when he was fighting during the Civil War, and then from Chicago after the war was over, where he told his sweetheart to wait a minute before she came to join him because there had been this big fire. My grandmother loved her grandfather, and she followed him in a lot that he did. And she saved those letters, and she saved this picture of him. And she told me, when I asked her about her grandfather, that he had helped to organize the Third Unitarian Church in Chicago. And I found myself wanting to have a church after she told me that, and I decided I'd try it out because my former wife and I had moved to the western suburbs, so we trucked into Chicago, and even though I'd been raised an Episcopalian, I just couldn't stomach what was going on in that church any longer, so I tried out that church my great-grandfather had helped to found, and I found a religious home there. I found that its living tradition was a part of my own. My upscale father and mother had desired something to match their social status they were striving to have, so they sent me to that Episcopal church down the street, but it never quite fit who I was. In my DNA, there was something else, this living tradition of which we're a part. So why didn't my grandmother maintain her Unitarian and Universalist loyalties like her mother and father did? She was a good woman, but she didn't have the covenantal understanding that my great-grandfather had with a faith. So she just sent my mother down the street to the Congregational Church because it was close by and she could walk. Frederick Gale believed in a religious faith that was stronger than that. He felt his Unitarian faith had called him to serve something beyond himself and his family. He believed, as is true and central to our historic faith, that we are born into a covenant without our choosing. We are born into a covenant with other people and with life itself. Without whatever it is that's most sacred and holy, this thing that some call God. And we're called into that covenant to serve those interests of life, not just our own selfish interests. My great-grandfather wasn't alone in believing this. As you've heard this morning, there are many other people in our faith and in this living tradition who have helped inspire us today. It was the message my great-grandfather heard when he sat in that pew at the church he had helped to found in Chicago. And after I left teaching, I went back to the ministry a bit, and I did a couple of interim ministries, including one in San Francisco. And when I was the interim minister of that church, which is the first of our Unitarian or Universalist congregations out here in the West, I decided, history buff that I was, that I had to know something more about it. So I went down into the church's basement, and I poked around in the dusty archives that were there. In fact, it turned out, as I was writing sort of little histories of the ministers of that church, that I read the church board minutes from 1850 to 1955. Interesting reading when you get beyond the finances of the church. I found that the idea of covenant, particularly when I read the sermons of those past ministers, was always central in the message that was preached from the pulpit of that church. Our living tradition, you see, is all around us in the churches that we've built, including this church that we've built here in Walnut Creek. And I just imagine all the people of that living tradition and how many times they'd fill this sanctuary if they all came here at once. This church was brought into being because folks here on this side of the hills wanted to give their faith life in this community, the community where they had their homes. They wanted the light of its liberal beacon to shine here in the Diablo Valley, as the slogan of our church once put it. By the time I was called to be the minister of that church, though, that light had dimmed just a bit. In fact, during candidating week, the church's treasurer told me that I shouldn't come because the congregation would never be able to raise enough money to pay my salary. I don't know why I believed that maybe he wasn't telling me the truth, but it was partly my responsibility to do something about it. So my first task was to create a pledge drive that would actually go out and be successful enough to raise that amount of money. The second task I had was put to be by some of the more imaginative leaders of this church, led by Art Unger. And that was to begin a planning process that took almost 20 years to reach its goal. The growth of the church, expanding its staff, and building this beautiful sanctuary and then social hall. Art and the folks he gathered with him were like my great-grandfather. They were people who believed in a covenant with our faith and the sacredness it incorporates, and were willing to work tirelessly to build the facilities, to hire the staff, and create the worship and programs that would bring that sacredness to fruition here in the Diablo Valley. Their work was for the rest of us in our community and not just themselves. That's a part of the living tradition of this church. A tradition in which our ministers have played a part, but would never have been lived out without the work of others. Those we honor this morning are a part of that tradition, just as all the other people who have been a part of this congregation in the past. And we have to be a part of that tradition too. Just as I'm a part of the living tradition in which my great-grandfather took part. The living tradition to which my great-grandfather contributed in his time lived on in that little church on the west side of Chicago and provided a place for a great-grandson who wouldn't be born until long after he died could find a place for his own faith to have a home. A living tradition is one that doesn't die out. It wouldn't be living if it did. And as people who have committed ourselves to the Unitarian Universalist faith, we have an obligation to serve that tradition. I know it may be difficult to feel this way in the wake of the past election and all the things our new, I don't even want to call him, president has put in place this past week. What's going on feels so horrible, my wife and I can barely stand to listen to the news. But history teaches us that this isn't the first time that something like this has happened in our country. But when it did, people in the past, like our Unitarian and Universalist forebears, didn't give in. As you saw in the song sung by our children, a living tradition is one that doesn't go away just because there's something flying in the face of it. We must act on this faith, just as many of you did when you joined in the women's marches that were held around the country last week. And I saw one of those pink pussy hats in line this morning. Thanks for coming to church with it. That happened here in Walnut Creek, you know, just like other places. This may be a privileged community, at least parts of it, and some of you may be privileged in your own lives, but we don't just stand by passively when so much threatens our liberal democracy. We can't if we really care about what happens to people and to life as our covenant demands that we do. We still hear the words of John Winthrop, who told those who were to found the churches of New England back in the 1600s, the churches that would become later Unitarian, that the only way to avoid God's wrath being visited on these new settlements and to provide for their own posterity would be to follow the counsel of Micah, to do justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with our God. He went on, for this end we must knit together in this work as one person. We must uphold a familiar commerce together in all meekness, patience, and liberality. We must delight in each other, make others' conditions our own, rejoice together, mourn together, labor and suffer together, always having before our eyes our commission and community in our work, our community as members of the same body. That could be our own mission statement here in this church, all these centuries later. I'm proud to be a part of a living tradition that maintains that kind of covenantal understanding. Frederick Gale and the past and present members of this church have maintained that. It's one reason I am proud to wear Gale as my own middle name. No matter how much our president and many of his followers may dislike people like us aren't going to go away. We're going to continue to follow the counsel of Micah and the example of those before us who have been a part of our living tradition, a tradition which it is ours now to continue on, and we will. For to do so is to be responsive to a covenant in which we're bound with each other, bound with whatever it is that's most sacred and holy, this life that has given us our own lives. Amen to that. Amen.
I am a Unitarian. I am a Universalist. And I am very glad to have this community, as I mentioned at the top of the service, this particular week especially. I suspect there's a few people out there that feel the same way as I do. Being in community, it is written in the UUA website, is not incidental to being a Unitarian Universalist. It is intrinsic and inescapable. This is who we are. We are a special kind of gathered community, a community of memory and hope. In his classic book, Habits of the Heart, Dr. Robert Bella discusses communities of memory and their relationship to communities of hope. And he says, communities have a history in the important sense that they are constituted by their past, and for this reason, we can speak of a real community as a community of memory, one that does not forget its past. And in order not to forget the past, the community has to retell its story, as we do each year in this service of the living tradition. In order not to forget its narrative, it offers examples of those people who have embodied and exemplified what it means to be in that community. And then he says, this is what makes us a community of memory. And the stories that make up a tradition also contain conceptions of characters, of what a good person is like, and of the virtues that define such a character. The communities of memory that are tied to the past also turn us to the future as communities of hope. They carry a context of meaning that can allow us to connect our aspirations for ourselves and for those around us to the aspirations of a larger whole, and to see our own efforts as being in part contributions to a common good. How grateful we are this morning to have a community interested in contributions to a common good. In this week and on this day, when we will gather after this at 11:15 to ratify our aspirations together as a community and our Make It So goals, and also to talk about how we respond to this time of national tragedy, we are so grateful to be here and to be gathered. In this week, when in addition to those who were at the women's marches around our area and around our nation, we have also had people on the streets demanding that the sheriff in this county respect the law of this state, which is found in the Trust Act. And we have had people last night, several among us I know, who were at the San Francisco airport until the wee hours of this morning, testifying and witnessing that we should not be holding innocent people without cause, and being a presence to that, including our own minister, the Reverend Renoir Hamami. In this week, it is very important for us to be reminded that in this place, we hold as part of our living tradition that past which is grounded in the highest aspirations that we have. And this place is a refuge for many. It's a place of connection and spiritual sustenance. And we need to remember in this time, in this place, that we are bound not only to what we are doing here right now, but to that larger calling which comes through our faith traditions, and to hold on to, always to hold on to, our vision of those highest aspirations, though we live in a muckraking, soul-chilling time. We are a community that remembers the promise of truth, a community that holds among its very DNA a tradition of questioning authority of all kinds. We are a community that knows how important it is to remember that deep passion that burns deep in our soul. We are a religious community, which means that we care about more than just the people who sign our membership book, though we welcome and celebrate each and every one as a great and glorious gift. We are about more than today's needs for worship and education and programs. We are about something that is larger than what can be held in the bounds of this walls, as beautiful as these walls are and as grateful as we are for those who have built them. We are, in fact, in covenant with the aspirations of our religious ancestors who gave their lives so that we might be free, who questioned so that we might worship in freedom, who took risks in their times when the blemishes on the fabric of human community needed to be addressed. In this week, in which we have seen so many hateful acts done, in a week which, on the Holocaust Day of Remembrance for our nation, we saw the new president sign 2 odious executive orders targeting those most vulnerable in our economic system and unleashing further toxic waste of hatred. We remember who we are. In this time when we see our immigration system and our economic system as so broken, we are also seeing an effort to shunt the blame for those systems off on people who have had no part in the equation and away from those who have benefited the most. The anti-Muslim actions that we have seen this week defy words, for they are random and cruel, and they're a sign that we need to do more as a community. In these days, this community must be a stronghold for many, and it also must be the place where people find sustenance in a nation grown rabid with hate, which may undoubtedly grow rather than diminish in the weeks to come. We must be a place which lives up to our covenant and promises to push ourselves out to do what we need to do to be the living tradition in this time, in this world we live in, though we may wish very much that it were not so. This community of memory and hope calls on us to be bold and courageous and not to retreat into those places of privilege and unknowing. So on this day, we remember our spiritual ancestors whose life force was given to allow a new religious unity. We remember the ones, many of whom we have lost in recent years, who built this place, its buildings, and also its spirit of embrace and hospitality and joy in human potential. We remember the highest aspirations of our faith, the ways that we are bound together to create a world where dignity and worth of all can be honored. And we remember that when we are grieving, as many, many of us are, we are not always at our best. We are not always at our brightest or sharpest, but we can be at our time of wholeness because we can be aware of one another. May we offer, as communities of hope, hope to our Jewish kin on this weekend closest to Holocaust Remembrance Day. And may we share with them in their sorrow that this was a day used to promote hate. And may we offer hope to our Muslim neighbors, including those within our own community who are struggling to understand how we could trap people in a quagmire and forget their humanity because they hold a particular heritage or religion. And may we offer hope to the immigrants among us and those in our wider community whom we interact with every day as we go about our business. May we offer hope to those who research and study the very structure of our earthly home and are now so fearful that what they have struggled to know will be lost. And though we may be speaking at times out of places of deep fear, out of these unsettled uncertainties that face us every day, may we also speak out of that place of love and unity that is at the foundation of our living tradition. In this time, when there are too many urgent matters for us to even comprehend, may we remember the power of connection and renewal and extend it to anyone who needs it that we encounter. And may we also remember our need to make room for rest and joy. In this place, in this tradition, we offer hope. We listen to build bridges and not widen gulfs. We especially listen to those who have been most affected by the heinous changes that are happening all around us. We offer hope when we stretch the boundaries of this place to see it not just as this campus, but as a place that we take out into our world all the days of our lives. We offer hope when we give standing to the justice of the far horizon, which is not the justice in our land or in our times. We give hope and we remember our tradition when we honor those who have been here for many years and those who are still part of that great gathering that must always go on for our precious tradition to continue. Most of all, we are grateful to be inheritors of a great covenant which binds us one to another, not only within these walls, but within the larger family of humanity. In this way, we will see that imperceivable and yet inevitable far horizon of justice, and we will be able to say with pride, when our children and grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren remember us, that we were true builders in a time in which it was needed, of memory and of hope. And we will be proud to say to those ancestors that we may never know, I am a Unitarian. I am a Universalist. May we be the ones to make it so.